The drums shook the earth. 200 riders formed a perfect circle. Spears pointed inward. Dust choked the air. In the center stood one man. Alone. Unarmed. Outnumbered. A single step from death. An arrow sliced the dirt at his feet. The next would pierce his heart. But then, a child's voice cut through the chaos. Small. Trembling. Yet strong enough to halt the storm. What happened next would decide whether a town burned or whether history itself took a different path. Welcome to WestDream Tales, where the forgotten echoes of the Wild West come alive. Here, legends aren't just written in books. They're whispered in the wind, carved in dust, and carried by the hoofbeats of time. Tonight, we bring you another tale that blurs the line between survival and destiny. Settle in, because the West always has a way of surprising those who dare to listen. And tonight, we ride back to Redstone, Texas, to the day one lone cowboy opened his door to a starving child and found himself face to face with 200 warriors. The sun was sinking low over the plains of Texas. Shadows stretched long across the grass. The air smelled of dust, leather, and smoke. Ethan Cross rode back from a long day tending cattle. He guided his horse slowly along the stream near his land. It was quiet, too quiet for a summer evening. Then he saw a movement by the water. A small figure stumbled through the brush, barefoot and trembling. Ethan pulled on the reins, narrowing his eyes. It was a child, a girl no older than 9. Her face gaunt, her lips cracked. She swayed as if the wind itself might knock her down. Ethan stayed still in the saddle. He didn't reach for his rifle. Instead, he slid slowly to the ground and stepped forward with open hands. The girl froze, eyes wide. She muttered in broken Kiowa words, clutching her stomach. Hunger was written all over her. Ethan nodded gently, though he understood only fragments. He could see enough. She had not eaten for days. He knelt by the stream, scooped water into his palm, and held it out. The girl hesitated, then drank greedily, coughing but relieved. She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. Ethan caught her before she fell. For a moment, she looked up at him, fear mixed with desperation. The sky darkened above them. Coyotes called in the distance. Ethan knew leaving her out here meant certain death. He whispered softly, "You're safe," though she could not understand. Then he lifted her carefully into his arms. The walk back to his cabin felt heavier than usual, not from her weight, but from the choice he had just made. Inside, he placed her near the fire. The glow lit her thin face, the sharp bones beneath her skin. He set bread and stew before her. She devoured it, shaking as she ate, as if afraid the food would vanish. Ethan let her be, only keeping the fire alive with fresh logs. As she slowed, he noticed something glimmer around her neck, a chain of silver beads, each etched with a tiny sun. Ethan's chest tightened. He had seen that symbol before, years ago, during tense meetings on the frontier. Warriors carried the same mark. It belonged to Chief Black Hawk, the most feared leader of the Kiowa, the one whose word could summon hundreds of riders in a night. Ethan leaned back, heart pounding. This was no lost child. She was the chief's daughter. He rubbed his jaw, staring at her as she drifted toward sleep. Outside, the wind pressed hard against the cabin walls. He thought of the stories he had heard, settlers whispering that Black Hawk would burn a town for the loss of even one family member. If the tribe believed Ethan had taken her, there would be no mercy. Not for him, not for the settlement nearby. The girl curled up by the fire, breathing evenly now. The silver beads shone in the flickering light. Ethan walked to the window. The land stretched endless and empty. Yet he knew eyes could be out there, watching. His thoughts pulled back to his own past. A wife, a daughter, both lost to fever years before. He still carried their memory, like a scar that never healed. Looking at the girl, so frail and alone, felt like seeing a ghost from another life. He clenched his fists. He could not let her die, but saving her might doom him. The night deepened. Ethan sat in silence, listening to the crackle of the fire and the girl's breathing. Then, hooves. Distant, but steady. The sound rolled across the plains like thunder. He stepped outside, shotgun in hand, though he prayed not to use it. The moon cast pale light across the prairie. On the horizon, faint sparks glimmered. Torches, dozens of them, bobbing like stars pulled down to earth. Ethan's stomach dropped. They were already looking. He backed inside, bolted the door, and doused the lanterns. His cabin shrank into darkness, the fire a dim heart at its core. The girl stirred but didn't wake. She clutched the beads at her neck as though she knew danger was closing in. Ethan sat by the door, gun across his knees. Every creak of wood sounded like a shout, every gust of wind like a war cry. He remembered the settlers' warnings. If Black Hawk comes for you, there's no bargaining. The hoofbeats faded for now, but the threat lingered in the silence. They had not found her yet, but soon they would. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Ethan dozed in and out, always jerking awake at the faintest sound. Just before dawn, he rose and checked the stream. No one there. No fresh tracks, only calm water under a pale sky. He exhaled, hoping for a sliver of peace. That's when he noticed something tucked into the girl's clothing. A scrap of leather, worn but carefully marked. Strange symbols carved into it, circles around a sun. He had seen markings like this in old stories told by traders. A prophecy, whispered across tribes. The child of the sun decides the fate of blood. Ethan's throat went dry. The girl was not just a chief's daughter. She might be the one their legend spoke of. He turned the leather over in his hands, the edges soft from years of wear. If the Kiowa believed she carried prophecy, they would stop at nothing. He slid the scrap back gently, unwilling to disturb her sleep. His mind raced with what the night ahead might bring. The sun finally crept above the horizon. The girl opened her eyes, weak but alive. She whispered a word he barely understood. Home! Ethan swallowed hard. He could not take her there, not without being torn apart, not without war breaking open. For the first time, he wished his cabin had thicker walls, stronger doors. He knew they would not hold if the Kiowa decided otherwise. Still, he looked at her and made a choice. He would stand between her and whatever came. The silence outside felt temporary, like the pause before a storm, and Ethan Cross understood. This was only the beginning. The sun rose over Redstone. Light poured across the prairie, washing away the shadows of night. But for Ethan Cross, morning brought no peace. The girl sat near the fire, silent but watchful. She ate what he gave her with small, careful bites, eyes darting at every sound. Ethan wanted to reassure her, but he knew words were useless. The only language between them was food, water, and the steady calm of his hands. Outside, the world stirred awake. Wagons creaked through the streets of the settlement. Dogs barked. Men called to one another as another day began. And then came the whispers. By mid-morning, Ethan saw riders approach. 3 men he knew from town. Farmhands turned drifters, rifles slung across their shoulders. They stopped at his fence, their eyes fixed on the small figure by the fire. Who's the girl? Cross, one of them called. His tone wasn't friendly. Ethan stepped outside and closing the door behind him. She was starving. I brought her in. The men exchanged looks. One spat into the dirt. That's no orphan. That's Black Hawk's blood. You've signed your own death warrant. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. Another man raised his voice. You hand her over. Maybe the Kiowa leave us be. But if they think you stole her, they'll torch every roof in Redstone. Ethan said nothing. The men waited, eyes narrowing, anger rising. Finally, one of them muttered, Suit yourself. But when they ride in, don't expect us to bleed for your mistake. They turned their horses and left. Ethan watched them go, dust trailing behind. He knew the message would spread fast. By noon, the entire settlement would know Ethan Cross harbored the daughter of Black Hawk. The girl sensed the change. She pulled her blanket tighter, whispering in Kiowa words too soft to catch. Fear shadowed her face. Ethan crouched beside her. He spoke slowly, though she could not understand. I'll keep you safe. The day dragged heavy. Every noise outside made him glance toward the door. Every bird's cry felt like a warning. Toward evening, a friend appeared. Sheriff William Hayes, an older man with weathered lines and a voice like gravel. He entered without knocking, scanning the cabin. His eyes landed on the girl. So it's true, Hayes muttered. Cross, do you have any idea what this means? Ethan stood his ground. She'd be dead if I left her there. Hayes sighed. Good intentions won't save us. Black Hawk's already stirring. My riders say war drums sounded last night. Ethan felt the weight of those words. He had heard them too. Hayes leaned in. There's still time. Ride her back yourself. Slip her into their camp, and pray they don't track you. Ethan shook his head. Every trail's watched. I'd never make it alive. The sheriff rubbed his temple. Then be ready. They'll come. Maybe tonight. He left as quickly as he came, slamming the door behind him. The cabin fell quiet again. Too quiet. Ethan checked his rifle, loaded his revolver, then sat by the window, staring out at the flat horizon. The girl had curled up again, exhaustion pulling her under. Her hand rested on the silver beads, clutching them like a lifeline. Ethan's eyes drifted to the leather scrap tucked beneath her blanket. The strange markings haunted him. A circle, a sun, lines radiating outward. He remembered an old trader once telling him of Kiowa prophecies, that one day, a child bearing the mark of the sun would determine whether the land drowned in blood or lived in peace. He hadn't believed it then, but now, with the girl asleep in his cabin, the prophecy felt less like myth and more like a fuse ready to ignite. Dusk came. The sky bled red, then darkened, and with the dark came the sound. Hooves. Dozens. Maybe more. Ethan stiffened. The girl stirred, whispering words he didn't understand. The ground trembled as riders moved unseen beyond the hills. Then came the beat of drums. Slow, steady, echoing through the night. The Kiowa were near. Ethan barred the door. He doused the fire until only embers glowed. The cabin sank into shadows. The girl whimpered softly, clutching the beads tighter. Ethan hushed her, though his own heart raced. Minutes stretched into hours. The drums rose, then faded, then rose again. He could almost see them, torches flickering beyond the horizon, warriors gathering like wolves in the dark. Sleep refused to come. Ethan sat rigid, hand on the shotgun, eyes fixed on the door. Near midnight, he heard a noise outside. Not hooves this time. Voices. He crawled to the window, peering out. Two shadows moved near the barn. Settlers, not Kiowa. He recognized them, the same men who had warned him earlier. They whispered harshly. One carried a rope. The other gripped a pistol. Ethan's stomach twisted. They meant to take the girl, hand her over themselves by their own safety. He slipped quietly to the door, stepping out into the cool night. Not a step closer, he growled. The men froze. Then one sneered. We're doing what you don't have the guts to do. She's Kiowa. She belongs with them. Ethan raised his shotgun. Touch that door and you'll answer to me. For a tense moment, silence stretched. Then the men backed off, cursing under their breath as they vanished into the dark. Ethan returned inside, pulse hammering. The girl hadn't woken. She slept on, unaware of how close danger had crept. He sank into his chair, sweat dripping despite the cool air. He knew this wouldn't be the last attempt. Toward dawn, exhaustion blurred his eyes. The drums grew louder again, rolling like thunder. And then, silence. The kind of silence that carried weight. Ethan stepped outside and squinting at the horizon. Smoke rose faintly in the distance. Campfires. Dozens of them. The Kiowa had come closer. Much closer. He heard a cry. An eagle's call, sharp and piercing. It echoed across the prairie, followed by a long, low horn. Ethan knew what it meant. They were signaling, drawing the circle tighter. He hurried back inside. The girl sat up now, eyes wide with fear. She clutched his sleeve, muttering father in broken English. Ethan froze, so she understood more than she let on. She looked at him, trembling. Father, coming. Ethan swallowed hard. Black Hawk himself was near. The prophecy's weight pressed heavier than ever. This child wasn't just blood. She was destiny, and every road ahead led into fire. Morning came, heavy with silence. No birds sang. No breeze stirred the grass. It was the kind of quiet that meant danger. Ethan stepped outside, scanning the horizon. His barn, his cattle, his fences, all ordinary. But the air carried weight. Something unseen pressed in from every side. The girl lingered at the doorway. Her eyes were wide, as if she could sense what Ethan already knew. They were no longer alone. By mid-morning, the first riders appeared. Dark silhouettes cresting the ridge, spears glinting in the sun, banners snapping in the wind. Then more came, and more, until the horizon rippled with movement. Ethan counted quickly. Dozens, then hundreds. A force larger than anything Redstone had ever faced. The Kiowa formed a ring, their horses stamping and snorting. Dust rose into a choking haze. In the center of that ring stood Ethan's cabin. The girl clutched the beads at her neck. Her lips moved in silent prayer. Ethan rested his hand on the shotgun, though he knew it meant nothing against so many. A voice cut through the haze, harsh, commanding. The language of the Kiowa, booming across the field. Bring the child out, or die where you stand. The words needed no translation. The demand was clear. Ethan's throat tightened. Every instinct told him to yield, to hand her over and save himself. But when he looked at the girl, trembling by the door, he stayed silent. The ring closed tighter. Riders pressed forward, weapons gleaming. Horses pawed the dirt, impatient for blood. Suddenly, an arrow hissed through the air. It struck the dirt inches from Ethan's boots. A warning. The next one would not miss. Before he could react, the girl bolted forward. She ran straight into the open yard, arms outstretched. The warriors froze, their bows lowered slightly. She shouted in Kiowa, her small voice trembling but clear. Ethan didn't know the words, but the meaning was plain. She stood between them and him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The child of Black Hawk had chosen her shield. A tall figure rode forward. The circle parted to let him through. Chief Black Hawk. His presence silenced the warriors. His eagle feather headdress caught the wind. His eyes, dark and sharp, fixed on Ethan. He dismounted slowly, each movement deliberate, like a man carrying the weight of a nation. Ethan stood still, hands open, shotgun resting against the wall. He would not provoke. Black Hawk strode closer. The girl ran to him, clinging to his robe. Relief washed over his face, but quickly hardened into rage as he looked at Ethan. For a long moment, the two men faced each other, one a warrior chief, the other a lone cowboy, both bound now by the fate of a child. Black Hawk spoke low, his words translated by a warrior beside him. "Why do you hold my daughter? Why is she here? In your walls?" Ethan's voice was steady. "She was starving. Alone. I gave her food. Nothing more." The translation rippled through the warriors. Murmurs rose, some disbelieving, some uncertain. Black Hawk's glare did not waver. He stepped closer, towering over Ethan. Then his eyes shifted, past Ethan, into the cabin. There, on the wall, hung a photograph, faded, but clear enough. Ethan with a woman and a young child, smiles frozen in time, long before fever took them away. Black Hawk's expression flickered. The fury dulled for a heartbeat. Pain crossed his face, pain he knew too well. The chief turned to his daughter, brushing a hand against her cheek. She clung tighter, whispering words only he could hear. Ethan stood silent, every muscle taut. His life hung on the chief's next breath. One warrior stepped forward, spear raised. He shouted for blood. Others joined, their voices rising. The circle roared with anger, demanding vengeance. Black Hawk lifted his hand. Instantly, silence fell. He studied Ethan again, his gaze unreadable. Then he spoke. "Why did you not flee? Why stand here, waiting for death?" Ethan swallowed. "Because she is a child, and I could not leave her to die." The words were translated. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some scowled. Some stared at the ground. Black Hawk's daughter spoke suddenly, her voice high, urgent. She pointed at Ethan, speaking in broken Kiowa and fragments of English. "He saved me. No steal. No hurt. Saved." Her small hand pressed against her chest, then against Ethan's. The warriors fell into stunned silence. Black Hawk's jaw tightened. He looked at his people, then back at the cowboy. Another voice rose from the circle. An elder, gray-haired, eyes clouded but sharp. If his heart is true, let the trial decide. Murmurs of agreement spread. A ritual older than memory. A test of courage. Black Hawk nodded slowly. Yes, the night trial. Let him sit unarmed within our circle. If he lives till dawn, he is no thief. He is a man of honor. Ethan felt the weight of every gaze on him. His chest tightened, but he gave no sign of fear. I'll do it, he said. The words carried out across the circle, translated swiftly. A ripple of surprise ran through the warriors. Few outsiders had ever accepted such a trial. The girl grabbed his arm, pleading softly. Ethan gave her a faint smile. He would not back down now. The warriors pulled back, forming a wider ring. Torches were planted into the ground, flames crackling as the sun dipped low. Ethan was led into the center. No weapons, no walls, only open ground under the rising moon. Black Hawk stood at the edge, arms crossed. His daughter clung to him, eyes wet but defiant. The trial had begun. The warriors beat their drums, slow and steady. The rhythm echoed like a heartbeat, pounding through the earth. Ethan sat cross-legged, hands resting on his knees. His eyes swept the circle. Hundreds of faces glared back, lit red by firelight. Hours dragged on. The night grew colder. Shadows danced across the prairie. Some warriors taunted him, shouting insults. Others hurled small stones, testing his resolve. Ethan did not flinch. At one point, a young warrior stormed forward, knife drawn. The crowd roared approval, but Black Hawk raised his hand, stopping him. The rules were clear. The trial must run until dawn. Ethan's body ached, but his mind held steady. He thought of his lost family. He thought of the girl inside his cabin, alive because of him. That gave him strength. The night stretched endlessly. The firelight blurred. His eyelids drooped. But each time his head sagged, the drums thundered louder, dragging him back to wakefulness. The moon crossed the sky. The stars wheeled overhead, and at last, faint light appeared in the east. The drums stopped. Silence fell like a blade. Ethan blinked into the pale dawn. He was still alive, still seated at the circle's heart. A murmur spread through the Kiowa ranks. Respect. Reluctant, but real. Black Hawk stepped forward, his expression grave. He raised his voice for all to hear. This man did not flee. He did not falter. He has shown the heart of truth. The warriors bowed their head. The trial had spoken. Ethan rose slowly, legs stiff, but pride burning in his chest. The girl ran to him, clutching his hand. Her face glowed with relief. Black Hawk watched them both, his eyes heavy with thought. He knew what he had to decide, the fate of his daughter, the fate of peace itself. The dawn stretched across the prairie, pale and cold. Smoke rose from dying torches. The trial was over, but the verdict still hung in the air. Ethan stood in the circle's center, shoulders heavy but unbroken. His breath formed small clouds in the morning chill. Warriors surrounded him in silence. No taunts now, only watchful eyes, measuring the man who had endured the night. Black Hawk stepped forward. His daughter clung to his side, her face still pale from fear but shining with pride. The chief raised his hand. The trial has spoken. This man's heart is strong, but honor alone does not mend blood. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some warriors nodded in agreement. Others frowned. The council of elders moved closer. An old voice spoke, dry as wind through bones. Let the child speak. Her truth is the seat of judgment. All eyes turned to her. The girl stepped forward, clutching her beads. She looked tiny against the sea of spears and painted faces. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. He saved me. No steal, no lie. Gave me food when I had none. She pressed her hand to her chest. He is good. Then, with a sudden burst of courage, she faced the warriors. If you strike him, you strike me too. The circle shifted. Men exchanged uneasy glances. Few had ever seen the chief's daughter defy tradition so openly. Black Hawk's jaw tightened. His eyes burned. not with anger, but with conflict. Another elder leaned on his staff. If the child of the sun has spoken, we must listen. The prophecy weighed heavy on every mind. If she truly bore that destiny, her words carried more than innocence. Black Hawk turned back to Ethan. Words can heal, but deeds bind. Will you swear, before my people, to stand as friend when they hunger, when they bleed, when they are hunted? Ethan held his gaze. I swear it. His voice was steady, each word deliberate. The pledge rolled through the crowd, translated swiftly. The murmur grew louder, softer, then fell into quiet agreement. The chief extended his hand, slow and measured. Ethan clasped it firmly. That single gesture carried the weight of two nations. The warriors lowered their weapons. Spears pointed to the ground. The circle broke apart. Drums sounded again, not for war, but for acknowledgement, a rhythm of acceptance. The girl smiled for the first time since Ethan had found her. Relief washed over her face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Black Hawk rested his hand on her shoulder. His eyes softened, though his voice stayed stern. You chose well, child. Your choice has spared blood. Ethan felt the knot in his chest loosen. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a breath without dread. The council declared the matter closed. Ethan was no longer an enemy. He was bound by oath to aid them, and in return, spared from vengeance. But it was more than mercy. It was trust, fragile, but real. The warriors dispersed slowly, disappearing into the horizon like smoke fading from fire. The circle dissolved, leaving Ethan and his cabin standing untouched. For Redstone, it was a miracle. For Ethan, it was the beginning of something larger than himself. The girl stayed by her father's side as they rode away. Yet before leaving, she turned back, waving with a shy smile. Ethan raised his hand in return. It was a farewell, but not an end. Long pause, transition to epilogue. Years passed. The story of that trial became legend whispered across both camps. Ethan lived quietly, but never turned away a Kiowa in need. A wounded rider at his door, a hungry child by the river. He gave what he had. The oath he made beneath the dawn became his guiding law. The girl grew into a young woman. Her name, Anna Hawk, became known far beyond the plains. She learned both tongues. She carried herself with the strength of her people and the calm reason of the settlers. When the government came to force treaties, she stood as translator, not just of words, but of hearts. Where others saw enemies, she spoke of common ground. Where others demanded land, she argued for survival. Many deals still cut deep, but bloodshed was less than it might have been. Her presence bent history toward peace. And through it all, she never forgot the man who had carried her from the stream to the fire. Ethan grew old, his hair silvered, his back bent, yet he remained respected on both sides of the frontier. When he rode into Kiowa camps, children greeted him without fear. Warriors gave a nod of respect. When he walked through Redstone, settlers whispered of the cowboy who once faced 200 alone. But Ethan never claimed glory. He only spoke of a choice, a child hungry by the water, and the hand he chose to extend instead of the trigger he might have pulled. In his 76th year, he fell ill, bedridden. He drifted between dreams and waking. On his final day, Anna Hawk came, no longer a child, but a leader in her own right. She sat by his side, holding his hand. You saved me, she said softly. But more than that, you saved us all. Ethan smiled faintly, eyes dim but warm. All I did was feed a child. Those were his last words. When he passed, both communities gathered. Settlers and Kiowa alike filled the prairie, standing side by side in silence. A riderless horse was led through the crowd, saddle empty, boots reversed in the stirrups. The old ritual of farewell. Then, as the sun dipped low, a herd of wild horses thundered across the horizon. Their hooves shook the ground. Their manes whipped like fire in the wind. The people looked up. Some whispered that it was the spirits of the Kiowa, carrying Ethan's soul to the beyond. Others simply bowed their heads, knowing they had witnessed something greater than themselves. Ethan Cross was laid to rest on the ridge above Redstone, his grave marked by simple stone, but honored by two nations. Anna Hawk often visited that place, She would bring her children, telling them of the man who chose mercy over fear. She told them the story not as myth, but as truth, a truth that saved lives and shaped futures. And so the legend lived on, not of war, not of conquest, but of a cowboy, a starving child, and a dawn that turned enemies into kin. In the silence after, the prairie itself seemed to breathe easier, because sometimes history changes not by battlefields, but by a single act of kindness that refuses to die. And that was tonight's story from WestDream Tales. If it stirred something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next ride into the frontier. But before you go, tell me, where are you listening from tonight, out on the road, sitting by your desk, or maybe winding down before sleep? Share it in the comments below. And if you have a story, maybe one passed down in your family, or a tale you've always wondered about, drop it in. Who knows, it might just become part of our next journey together. Until then, may your trail be safe, your nights be calm, and your dreams carry you westward.